Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Geraghty of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Glad you are here for the Thursday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Grab your stool. Yes, we have another good martini today. Good, bad, and crazy. And Jim, great find by you on the good martini. Everybody's looking for positive ways to look at how people are responding to the coronavirus threat. And boy, kudos to the Washington Post for highlighting this story. I'm sure others have it as well. But let's just read it. At his factory just off the Delaware River, in the far southeastern corner of Pennsylvania, Joe Boyce clocked in on March 23rd for the longest shift of his life. In his office, an air mattress replaced his desk chair. He brought a toothbrush and shaving kit, moving into the Braskem petrochemical plant in Marcus Hook, Pennsylvania, as if it were a makeshift college dormitory. The casual office kitchen became a mess hall for him, and his 42 coworkers turned into roommates. The factory's emergency operations center became their new lounge room. For 28 days, they did not leave, sleeping and working all in one place. In what they call a live-in at the factory, the undertaking was just one example of the endless ways that Americans in every industry have uniquely contributed to fighting coronavirus. The 43 men went home Sunday after each working 12-hour shifts all day and night for a month straight, producing tens of millions of pounds of the raw materials that will end up in face masks and surgical gowns worn on the front lines of the pandemic. No one told them they had to do it, Braskem America CEO Mark Nikolic said. All the workers volunteered, hunkering down at the plant to ensure no one caught the virus outside as they sought to meet the rocketing demand for their key product, polypropylene, which is needed to make various medical and hygienic items. Braskem's plant in Neal, West Virginia is doing a second live-in now. Jim, there's going above and beyond, and then there's these guys doing literally everything they can do for this country.
Yeah, and I think that in addition to, first of all, God bless each and every last one of these guys. I hope that in addition to getting a copious raise for all of the extraordinary overtime they've been putting in, they probably deserve some sort of proclamation from the state. People in their communities, hey, you know what? You pick up the check for them. Next round's on you if you see any of these guys when we're all allowed to be out and about again. Maybe even a presidential proclamation or award or something like that. These are the kind of people who deserve to be mentioned in the State of the Union address and things like that. I'm reminded of another example. It was an anecdote, I think, by Peggy Noonan talking about life in New York City after 9/11. And we'd heard about, obviously, the enormous toll on the city of when the towers collapsed. We heard about the firefighters, police officers, emergency medical services, everybody who was there and on scene and who suffered enormous losses and who had demonstrated just, unimaginable courage that day. But when the immediate crisis was done, the problems remained, and in fact, dangerous work still remained. And so once, the immediate crisis of the collapse and fires and things like that had stopped, there was this giant pile of wreckage at Ground Zero that needed to be cleared out. And it was cleaning up wreckage is a very dangerous work. If you don't do it correctly, you can end up with further collapse and injuries and things like that. And you were often trying to collect human remains amongst all that stuff. So basically this turned to construction workers who had the job of deconstructing. And I think it was the Atlantic magazine did this fascinating piece about how the effort to remove all of the wreckage that had fallen in Lower Manhattan was really an engineering effort almost on par with the original construction of the World Trade Center in the first place. And, particularly for those first couple of weeks after it, all of these dump trucks and all these big trucks would come along, doing this. And the guys who were reporting for duty on this, people used to stop and they would line up on the side of the street and people would applaud. And you could see it in the face. Peggy Noonan describes it being in the faces of these guys. Nobody had applauded for them since probably their wedding day. This idea that we don't spend a lot of time, giving roars and cheers to construction workers. We used to, walk by the construction site, maybe we peek in over the fence, and that's about it. And the lesson of this is that whatever your job is, whatever you do in society, you have no idea when in some sort of set of circumstances, what you do could suddenly be really, really important. It could have life and death consequences, or at the very least, have an enormous impact on the quality of life and the rest of society's ability to handle to respond to a crisis. Pizza delivery guys right now are doing a little bit of that. Food delivery guys, grocery store workers. We have so many tiny little acts of heroism going on all around us. And one of the things I hope not only at this particular moment, but I hope moving forward, we continue to appreciate that. We continue to salute that, recognize that. And yes, appreciate that. Like I said, maybe all these people deserve a little bit of a raise. Maybe picked up that next round, little bonuses here and there for job well done. But again, thank you for the Washington Post for spotlighting this. I think it was a local television station that first did this. Look, we need to recognize the million little heroes around us. You and I can enjoy laughing at the idiots on the beach, or all these other folks who are doing something stupid and who frustrate us. All in all, there are I genuinely believe that all around the world, particularly in America, people do want to help. And when given the opportunity, they will rise to the occasion. And so it's wonderful. We need to hear more about stories like this.
All right, let's move on to our bad martini now, Jim. And I don't know if we need to start calling Thursdays Black Thursday or Bloody Thursdays here, but every Thursday is when we get these weekly jobless claims, and it just keeps getting uglier. The Labor Department reporting that the number of Americans applying for state unemployment benefits totaled 4.427 million last week. Combined with the prior 4 jobless claims reports, the number of Americans who have filed for unemployment over the last 5 weeks alone is 26.45 million. That is now more than 4 million jobs lost than have been gained since the end of the Great Recession. So November 2009 till basically March of this year, the economy had added 22.4 million jobs. Now we've lost 26.45. And just to put that into perspective, that number bigger than the population of every state in the country except for California and Texas. So imagine everyone in Florida or everyone in Ohio or Pennsylvania, in some cases combining states, everybody out of a job. It's hard to even be hyperbolic about this. It's really, really horrific.
Yeah, and when we recognized how much our economy was going to have to shut down, for a while we could kind of say, okay, this is, and I had said on our podcast, well, okay, look, the good news is this, the issue is it's a health problem. It's a health crisis. It's a health crisis. It's forcing us to self-quarantine, and we can't interact with each other the way we usually do, and that's what's causing the deep-rooted economic effects. But there's nothing inherently wrong with our economy. Our banks did not make a whole bunch of crazy loans. I had originally said it's not like we had a crisis in oil prices. What I was thinking was the 1970s style, sudden spike in oil prices, not a sudden calamitous collapse in oil prices. That all in all, this was not some sort of giant issue of our economy allocating resources into a bad situation. What we say, when you fix the health issue, then everybody's economic activity will return back to normal, and all of a sudden you'd see the economy bounce right back up. Well, each week this goes on. The people who lose their businesses, the people who lose their jobs, well, they're eating through their savings, which takes away their discretionary income, which means they can't go out to a restaurant when this is done as often as they used to. They can't go on vacation. They can't buy that plane ticket. They can't go on that cruise. They can't stay in a hotel. All these sorts of portions of our economy, particularly the service economy, that are run by discretionary income, depend upon people having discretionary income. And unemployment benefits, they help you get through, but they generally don't leave you with a lot of money for discretionary income. People are able to thrive and prosper when they work and they collect a paycheck and they get raises and bonuses, like we mentioned in that previous podcast, previous martini. And, you're able to do that. Each week this extends, not just like the rate of a V-shaped or U-shaped recovery, where you're suddenly zooming right back up to the top, becomes less likely. The J-shaped or other V-shaped, the idea of it being a more slower and gradual recovery, I think becomes more likely. And that's really bad. It's really bad if you're hoping for a President Trump's reelection. That's really bad if you're hoping for the state of the country. That's very bad if you're hoping for all kinds of societal effects, from suicides to depression to alcoholism to drug abuse to homelessness to poverty to malnutrition. You name it. People are, facing all kinds of, bad effects of this economy. And now that I think, perhaps the little cherry on top of this bad martini is the assessment that the good news is, like I said, Congress just passed that latest relief bill. It's probably going to be enough to cover everyone who applied in the first round of small business loans, support loans, who didn't get them. So basically, Congress completed its makeup work. It did not actually provide much capacity to expand the number of people who could get small business or other forms of assistance. Really frustrating, really bad. This is not something that can be continued over and over again, Greg. At some point, we got to start sending people back to work in some capacity, the safest way possible, in order to get them building things, generating things, manufacturing things, and actually able to buy things so our economy can get moving again.
You talked about this yesterday, not on the podcast, but you've written about it, that we have to re-engage, but we have to re-engage intelligently. We obviously have the criteria set out by the task force and the 3 phases of re-emerging. But what are some of the key points that you were writing about in terms of the intelligent way to do this?
First of all, everyone out there, I hope you by now you've got a mask, or you can think about where you can get one, or you're one is on its way to you, maybe in the mail. And you're probably going to be wearing that mask for a good long time. It is not going to be, you may not like it. It may be very weird. It may be very ominous to walk down the street and see everyone wearing masks, but that's probably what you're going to have to do. As I've been making the point, in grocery stores, the process of shopping is not dangerous by what you're buying, despite what Governor Whitmer might think. The danger comes from the interaction with other people. So if you're wearing a mask, the good news is it probably makes it less likely. And I hear people saying, well, masks don't provide perfect protection. Yeah, the idea, is it completely around your face? Are you adjusting it? Is it going to give you 100% protection? No. Will it give you more protection? Yes. And for everybody out there who said, I thought masks don't do any good, do you think the doctors and health professionals are wearing them for decoration? No. They're wearing it because they provide at least some protection. You might want to think about wearing gloves. And obviously at home, you got to wash the gloves or put them in some place. The virus can last on certain materials for a certain number of hours. Wash your gloves with soap and water, wash your hands with soap and water. You're probably going to be fine. As you go into stores, you're probably going to go in, get your stuff, and get out. You're probably not going to want to dilly-dally. You're probably not going to want to linger or spend any more time in the presence of large groups of people. The idea of limiting the number of people in a store probably makes a lot of sense. I think what really is nagging at me, and a problem, there are two areas we have not really thought through how to do this in a safe way. In restaurants and bars, there's that study. It came out of China, and I don't know if it's 100% right, but the gist is air conditioning and other ventilation systems can spread viruses all around a room. If you have the virus, yes, it comes out when you're coughing or sneezing, but it also comes out as you're breathing and as you're speaking. Now, it doesn't come out as far, and obviously, given a choice between somebody talking near me and somebody sneezing on me, I know exactly which one I'm, a little less worried about. But basically, if the idea of, for a long time, I've been saying, okay, you do it every other booth or something like that. Some people think you might need even more spaced out seating to make it safe. Maybe we're going to go back to, what we could end up with a lot of people picnicking in parks and beer gardens and stuff like that. People really spread out as they do this. Open spaces like beaches and parks, I think the evidence is that as long as you're social distancing, try to keep 6 feet from people, the better off you're going to be. So at least people could go out and enjoy that. Factories and assembly lines, again, you're going to have to think about how close are people going to be? Are they going to be wearing gloves? Are they going to be you want everybody wearing masks? Generally, we want to try to avoid breathing on each other. And assuming that you've got a 6 feet radius around you, how much can you minimize your interaction with that? There's probably nothing that's going to be perfect, but waiting for perfect protection would mean we would never reopen our economy. We need to figure out an acceptable level of risk, and as I said, using lots of personal protection, washing your hands every chance you get, all of that stuff is probably going to make things a weird America, certainly not a return to normal America, but something where at least we can get our economy moving on some level to end this downspin and to get us something to build the road towards a better recovery at some point in the future.
So my 2 big takeaways from what you just said, Jim, is there's going to be a big uptick in al fresco dining. And secondly, you're going to want to stay away from people like Niedermeyer and Animal House, particularly if you're inappropriately wearing your pledge pin. Is that about...
Look, if you have any antisocial tendencies, the end of the lockdown doesn't mean you have to give that up. If you want a reason to avoid people, you have a good reason to avoid people.
Yes, that's true. And one little silver lining here is that oil seems to be bouncing back to some extent. So that's happy news. On the more depressing side, Jim, I don't know if you saw this today, but one county in Northern Virginia, it's not one where you or I live, but it's Loudoun County in Northern Virginia, is already looking at 3 different scenarios for starting up school in the fall, and one of them does not involve people actually in the buildings. So they're already conditioning parents that things might not be normal even in September.
Well, Greg, here in Authenticity Woods, I believe the latest estimate is that the online learning system for this semester in spring should be ready by fall.
I see the vice superintendent for tech resigned in your county, so I'm sure that's going well.
Did he resign, or did he just run out of town in a hurry?
Well, as a woman, I don't remember her name.
There was a crowd, a socially distanced crowd of parents with pitchforks and torches headed towards his home, so all wearing masks.
All right, let's move on to our Crazy Martini now, Jim. And this kind of is a follow-up to yesterday's Crazy Martini about how we thought that the first coronavirus-related death in the United States was late February, and it turns out it was the first week of February. And now we're seeing other models, and yes, the models change a lot, so take this however you want to in terms of accuracy, but it's kind of reevaluating how far this virus had already spread as of the beginning of March. According to the New York Times, looking at this northeastern model, in 5 major U.S. cities, as of March 1st, there were only 23 confirmed cases of coronavirus. But according to the model, there could have actually been about 28,000 infections in those cities by then. And that's, of course, 2 weeks before major mitigation went into effect. We're looking at Boston, Seattle, Chicago, San Francisco, and New York, which they believe New York had nearly 11,000 cases already by the beginning of March. Not sure of all the algorithms that go into that. But again, Jim, if things were moving that much that early, that is, again, a different way to calculate where we are right now.
Yeah, so this is our Crazy Martini. And let's, in addition to yesterday's news that the first death that can be attributed to the coronavirus in this country was February 6th, not February 27th, 28th, something like that. Pushes back the 3 weeks, our timeline of when this virus was floating around in the country. And because we cannot connect that case in California to anybody, that first case up in Seattle, which was in late January, now all of a sudden we're like, okay, maybe this virus was floating around sometime in certainly on the West Coast and maybe in a whole bunch of parts of the country, or several parts of the country in early February, maybe late January. I don't know about you, Greg. I continue to encounter lots of people on social media and people who are emailing in who are like, Jim, I really had a really bad flu in November or December, who are very convinced that they had coronavirus. Now, right now, my guess is no, I think that probably was a flu. We had a couple of people in my family had the flu. This was a bad flu season. A lot of people had the flu and it was really rough. Nonetheless, people are pretty convinced it was the coronavirus. And so now the February cases, I can't quite say, oh, pish posh, there's no way you had this. I was pleased to see, again, things I don't often say. This is what makes it a Crazy Martini. Gavin Newsom said they want to go back and do autopsies on cases going back several months in California. I imagine the hospitals and doctors' offices know the people who succumb to pneumonia or to some other a death that now looks a little bit odd in retrospect, that they now suspect, hey, wait a minute, maybe that person did drop dead at a surprisingly young age, or their condition really did worsen a lot more than we'd expect from the flu. Let's, and this is going to require disinterring bodies, might have to notify the families. I certainly hope people are cooperative with this. But this does illuminate a great deal. So my first thought is, okay, maybe it was a couple of weeks. This from Northeastern University, this is pretty mind-boggling. And in the sense that, March 1st, for perspective, I realize no one can tell what day it is anymore, besides my usual joke of every day being Friday, Greg. Although, as one person put it accurately, since this quarantine began, every day has been Wednesday. So we are now in the middle of week 6, and it really was middle of that, right around March, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th. That's when this went from, hey, this is a really crazy thing happening in Asia to, whoa, wait, what's going on? Right? This is when the NBA announced they were suspending the season. Tom Hanks had his announcement that he had tested positive. The president had his Oval Office address, and at least in my neck of the woods, the last day of school was March 12th. That's where you had this sense of like, okay, well, this is really a crisis we're not used to dealing with. 2 weeks before that, this Northeastern model said that just in these 5 cities, Boston, Seattle, Chicago, San Francisco, and New York, that there were 28,000 infections. People walking around having it, coughing into their hands, touching the handrail, touching the elevator button, touching the ATM buttons. including 10,000 in New York City. That seems really high from where but I can't quite hand wave it away. I hope the New York Times is not. This is right now front and center on the New York Times webpage. So, Northeastern University is not some kooky fly by night university. There's reason to think these people's models know what they're talking about. If so, and there really were tens of thousands of people walking around in March. Well, now the idea of this floating around in large numbers in February seems pretty plausible. The idea of maybe a bunch of people having it in January suddenly seems more plausible. The sort of thing that requires more study. And again, I prefer more biology and less statistics if it's possible to do this. This is where you wish we had just tons of testing, and we're probably going to be doing lots and lots of testing. But again, if this model shakes out, then the Santa Clara study and other folks who are saying, yeah, there are lots and lots of Americans walking around with antibodies who've already had this and dealt with this in the form of a winter cold. If that's it, fantastic. That's knocking on wood. That would be great, because we'll be a lot closer to herd immunity. And we could feel a little more reassured about people not succumbing to this virus, but still some more research. But that was just the wait, can that possibly be right study of the day?
Well, Jim, let's end on a happier note, and that's that the NFL draft is today. And you're wondering, how do you transition from the coronavirus to the NFL draft? Well, I can do it because I'm a Bears fan. And as you know, we've talked about the travails of Chicago Bears quarterback Mitch Trubisky and his lack of accuracy over the past couple of years. I don't know if you saw this a couple of weeks ago. There was a pizza joint, I think in Chicago, that put out a sign that said, during this coronavirus outbreak, remember to remain at least 10 feet away from others. If you're wondering how far that is, picture a Bears wide receiver and then imagine where Trubisky actually threw the pass. That distance is about 10 feet.
That was perfect. That was exactly, one of the funnier moments and something definitely much needed. Look, it's nice to know Americans, and in particular Bears fans, still have their sense of humor in the middle of all this.
So we got the draft tonight. It's going to be by technology. It's not going to be in a huge theater like it normally is. There are still ways apparently to boo Roger Goodell, which is good, and it's going to go to charity. So that's always very helpful. And so I'm just waiting for, the commissioner and the GM of the Bengals on that first pick to be like, what? Can you hear me? You're breaking up. I can't follow you along. So that could make things a little more fun. But, it's a new day, Jim. We talked about how the Patriots look a lot different yesterday. The Bears, of course, don't have a first-round pick because they're still paying for Khalil Mack from a couple of years ago in that trade with the Raiders. But we know Joe Burrow's going to have a big night. The Dolphins have 3 first-round picks, at least right now, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you have this terrible feeling that at some point some team's going to try to announce their pick through a YouTube video. They'll put out the link. The link will go through. Everyone will click on it. And all we'll get is, never going to give you up, never going to let you down. But as far as we know, everything will be fine. Booing Goodell from home won't quite be the same. It's interesting. The only thing that this draft only gets interesting and exciting after the first few. Everybody thinks the Bengals are taking Joe Burrow, and I think it's pretty likely to happen. Everybody's pretty sure the Redskins are going to take Chase Young. The edge rusher seems like the safest pick. I don't buy any of this talk that they were thinking about Tua or any of these other quarterback options. A lot of people think they're going to be trades. And I got to tell you, Greg, my sense is if you're going to commit a big trade, you would have done it by now. You don't want to do this during the draft because, first of all, apparently the NFL did do a run-through and did have lots of glitches the first time. First of all, a lot of people are like, the NFL. I'm like, no, I'm glad they're doing this. Like, imagine if they'd done this for healthcare.gov. If they'd done this for Fairfax County Public Schools, distance learning. You test these things to see how they work, and sometimes they don't work, and that gives you time to work out the bugs. But let's imagine your strategy tonight involves making some quick, on-the-fly trades and handling lots of calls from lots of other teams, and I just better hope your tech holds up. I think most teams once the draft starts, I think everybody's going to be fairly pleased with what they've got, and they're going to go through it. I don't think you're going to see a lot of wheeling and dealing tonight, but then again, I have been wrong. The Lions will take that cornerback, Jeff Okudah, looks like a very solid one. A lot of questions about the Giants picking 4th. Now the rumors they want to go offensive tackle. I think they're going to go with Isaiah Simmons, that super-duper linebacker safety. I've also seen a lot of people say the Chargers, who, by the way, Greg, I know I've seen the Bears in their dark blue, almost black uniforms.
Yes.
I know I've seen them in that kind of orangey red one, which I don't like as much, but fine, whatever.
Right.
But most teams now have two variations of their home uniforms and the white road uniforms. And yes, I know a lot of teams wear their white at home and other colored on the road, stuff. The Los Angeles Chargers, showing my age there. The Los Angeles Chargers have announced that they now have 3 different home colored jerseys. That kind of powdered blue, a kind of a navy blue, and then a really dark blue that's almost black. And I'm just like, first of all, I blame you, University of Oregon. For those who don't know, they're affiliated with Nike, and I guess they decide, and apparently Vogue magazine, I don't know, for whatever reason, University of Oregon's decided they never want to wear the same uniform twice. Some teams are workhorses. Some teams have their identity as a show horse, and apparently University of Oregon is the clothes horse of the college football scene because they never wear the same uniform twice. Los Angeles Chargers now have 4. Anyway, I figure they need a quarterback. I think they go with Justin. Is it Herbert or Hebert? Is he Cajun?
I think it's Herbert. I, of course, always think of Bobby Hebert back in the day, but
there you go.
I think in this case it's Herbert.
I've been so conditioned to think of it as Hebert. Herbert, who's that? But figure they go quarterback. They need one. Phillip Rivers has gone off to form his compound with his 47 children. By the way, we're talking about a guy who's been in really rough shape with the 10 people, no more than gatherings of 10 people. The Jets pick 11th. I'm hoping they get one of the offensive tackles. They're all really good. There's 4 of them. We certainly need them. So as long as one of them's there at 11, I'm fine.
I am not one to comment much on fashion. I will say this on uniforms, though. The top and the bottoms should not be the same color. It drives me crazy. You need some contrast there. When you when you wear all white, you look weird. When you wear all dark, you look like Batman. It just doesn't work. And just have a little contrast there. And yes, have one home and one away. It drives me crazy. Just because Phil Knight's a U of Oregon alum doesn't mean that everybody's got to go crazy. But Jim, you never know whether this will be a legendary draft or not. You think of legendary drafts, you think of 1983 when you had John Elway and Dan Marino and Jim Kelly, and of course the legendary Ken O'Brien drafted that year for the New York Jets. 2004 was another one, not quite as illustrious as that class, but you had Eli Manning and Ben Roethlisberger and the aforementioned Phillip Rivers. But it's not just NFL drafts. 2004 was a big year in the conservative reporter and blogger draft as well. And prepare yourself for the world's worst William F. Buckley Jr. impression. But here is apparently what happened with that draft 16 years ago. He said this, the intellectual notion of armed forces conscription, more colloquially known as the draft, originated most likely in ancient Mesopotamia. It was seen again in Babylonian times when laborers owed military service to the great Hammurabi. Through the centuries, the practice was adopted in many other societies, including our own Western culture during the travesty known as the French Revolution, and even here in the United States. Conscription, of course, is anathema to liberty. It acts as the heavy hand of government to thwart the aspirations of a free people, and only in the most dire circumstances ought to be contemplated. Quite right. With the first pick in the 2004 conservative reporter and blogger draft, National Review proudly selects Jim Geraghty.
Greg, I am wowed. First of all, I like listeners. I think we can tell what staying at home is doing to Greg. That is not quite the way it went, but just I assume that took preparation, Greg. I don't think you could rattle that off the top of your head, but man, in whatever time you thought of that, you did better than 90-some% of the Saturday Night Live sketches over the past 10 years. And now I'm sitting thinking, why did we not do William F. Buckley hosts the NFL draft? I know that Dana Carvey once did George F. Will's Sports Machine.
That was hilarious.
Which was him doing a trivia contest with Lasorda and Mike Schmidt, and the idea that they could barely understand what he was asking and all the questions and all that stuff. But really well done, Greg. I didn't quite go like that, but I like to imagine that it did. So.
Excellent. Well, certainly they could put you up in the Hall of Fame, but you've got many active years left. So enjoy that. Congratulations to National Review Online for an excellent selection back in the day. Jim, see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Geraghty, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos, Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please subscribe to the podcast. Also, leave us a kind review with 5 stars. And please join us Friday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.